Welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in the Mendham such. So, some sort of, whatever you call it. Uh, yeah, there's probably some label for it and I just can't remember it. But anyway, where you do this little bit of stuff before you get to the main stuff. Housekeeping or something. Ew. Yeah, I gotta come up with a better word for that. So anyway, yeah, Richard, the Dick Coughlin, had his account, you know, removed by the YouTubes again, and he has a new account, or well, another account that I'll have to use, called Brother Nero. I'll leave a link below, and if you were unaware that you know YouTube has hurt him, then uh, whatever, subscribe and such and all that mush. Um, I don't know what the details are. I mean, you know, Coughlin's always been a little bit, whatever, pushes the envelope and all that kind of crap. So, it's not like he asked for it. But, you sort of know the danger places. And we all learn by experience what we can and cannot do to some extent. Which isn't entirely true. I mean, any time they can just decide to start striking you for a bunch of past conduct and there's nothing you can do about it. So we're all kind of vulnerable to some standard that hasn't been applied for years and that all of a sudden they'll apply it. So anyway, it's just sucks that this is the state of affairs and such. So anyway, yeah. So he has sort of beefed up. He's not like, he's not all scrawny anymore. He's, I don't know if I really like Brother Nero. It's not, maybe you should, if you're going to make up names, I'm just trying to think of a name to make up, like Bog B. Bugly. Yeah, maybe I'll call myself that when my channel gets destroyed. But anyway, Bog B. Bugly. I like that. Anyway, for girls, Uglana Bistinky. Yeah, that's a good name, right? Uglana Bistinky. It makes me laugh every time I say it. Yeah. Anyway, so that's enough of that shit. I think that's the only news item. Yeah, I have to do. Yeah, I had intended to make a formal video where I organized things and all that kind of crap, and it just didn't get done. So I'll do more informal slop in the general subject, and in future try to turn it into some sort of PowerPoint, thing, beyond just notes. But other people have played with this idea a little bit of organizing these, levels of understanding, these key words. And Piro's list is actually hilarious, so maybe I'll read some of that. Or maybe I'll just do that because it gets into all the subjects eventually. But words, I have the word efficiency at Google here. Like, this should be a word that means something to people, and it's it's all this cartoon art, nothing even close to a really good, saying something important about efficiency and how this is something everybody should strive to avoid wasting. And I'll even do the word waste, which is even funnier because apparently waste is garbage now. So there is no word waste in the vocabulary anymore. It's just been turned into the word garbage, which, they aren't really the same thing. Not really. So anyway, we'll get back to this eventually. So Piro's list starts with the art of philosophy, which, again, it's just a silly combination of words. Art is just making any kind of mess and seeing if it says something to somebody in a lot of respects. It's entirely some sort of touchy-feely, subjective thing. And Um, one could talk about art in the technical sense, and it might have meant something. In the past, the word artist might have meant something because to be called an artist, you, generally speaking, had to be very good. You had to have the rendering skill. You had to be able to take reality and render it well. So there was a precision to the idea of being an artist. And then it turned into this creative thing. And, there's no end to that. So anything can be called creative. And so the idea of the art of philosophy is just like saying the diarrhea of philosophy. It's just turning it into mush and garbage as a concept or a word. And most people just don't get these words in the right order anyway. I would argue that science is the first word. This attempt to discover the truth. How does it work? What makes it happen? Dissecting the causes and the effects, dissecting the function. What is the function? And so philosophy is a subcategory of science, and other people have it the other way around. They think that science is a philosophy, and then science turns into an art. That's just so illogical. Now, and so I would argue that there's science, and then there's the sciences, physics and chemistry and biology, and philosophy is another category of science. It's an effort to explain the qualia of life, the meaning of life, the function in some respects. So you rely on biology and other sciences to feed your philosophical knowledge, to gain your perspective. But it's a science. It's your effort. Your effort is clearly to describe reality, not to just make up three bear stories that have people in them. The idea is to get it right, not to get it wrong. And it's really important. Getting the understanding how the motor works is really important to maintaining it or fixing it or keeping it running at peak efficiency. And it's important because waste sucks. I mean, waste is really bad, especially wasted pain and suffering. It's the last thing you want to waste. It's the ultimate waste. It is the source of why waste is bad. It's because waste means somebody is going to be left without. That there isn't going to be enough pie for everybody to have a piece of pie. There's going to be a sad face, and more precisely, there's going to be a tortured mind. And that's a bad thing. So we can know that. So anyway, so it starts off bad, and then it just goes from bad to, as usual with Pyrrho, worse. So number 2, relativistic skepticism. Again, you've got to throw in these mushy ideas that somehow there is not an absolute. You can't know for sure that a flat tire is a dysfunctional tire. Somehow it's a relative thing, not an absolute thing. And we kind of know that things are absolute, and yes, they can have multi-purposes. You could probably find another use for this bottle cap besides capping a bottle. I mean, you could flip it like a coin, and do coin tosses with it. But it doesn't work very well. But anyway, so it can have other purposes. But this, it's just more. And this idea of skepticism it should always be earned, but it's like the word statistics or something. It's a dangerous word if you're too skeptical. So again, you're supposed to be cautious for good reason. You're not supposed to be going outside with a meteor helmet, because you're skeptical about the report that it's a 1 in a zillion chance that a meteor hits you in the head. Or some kind of crap like that. I mean, we see what skepticism does. It creates a bunch of wacky truthers who create elaborate conspiracy theories constantly because of all this misguided and the lack of relative perspective. So, whatever, mushy language. Then he just turns the words around and says skeptical relativism. I mean, what's the point of that? But anyway, just two mush words. Skepticism and relative they're both useless jargon. You don't have to compare everything to something else to know it's good or bad. It can be bad all by itself, and it can be good. independent of making comparisons. I mean, a potato chip can be just fine. You don't need to compare it to cupcakes to know potato chip tastes good. That kind of thing. All right, then he does something bizarre. Spiritual materialism. Why even talk about these silly words? These archaic, babbly, woo-woo religious jargon. Why even try to drag that into any kind of conversation? It can only make a mess. Spiritual? What? Oh, because we have a spiritual feeling. Well, maybe you have one. Okay, because you were trained to have one. You were programmed and brainwashed into thinking this somehow makes sense to see, gods in, whatever, barberry bushes. But there's no there's no intrinsic or default status where we walk around saying I'm spiritual. It's only because somebody puts the idiotic notions in your head that there's ghosts living in all the rocks or something. Somebody puts the idea into your head, and that's how it gets there. It doesn't get there by some logical process. It gets there by illogical, traditional mumbo-jumbo, totem poles, and ghost stories. And people just end up not stepping on cracks because they heard it could possibly break your mother's back. So they say, well, I might as well give it the benefit of the doubt. So that's all this spiritualism. It's just a bunch of benefit of the doubt, mumbo-jumbo, voodoo, witch doctors cursing you, and so you're, well, gee, I'll better wear my anti-curse shield just in case. But it's just babble. It's the worst. It preys on the worst part of our intellect, our superstition and our fear and our lack of control, and it just takes advantage of paranoia. It's a horrible word. Okay, and then he says material spirituality. Why? I mean, plays with these concepts and reverses them as if they mean something. Like this material spirituality. How could that possibly mean anything reasonable? Absolute rubbish. So then he says ethical society. I mean, it's just such a bizarre leap from these silly little notional personal things to this ethical society thing, which is a whole nother, it's a whole different ball game of, how memes virus through, human consciousnesses, and how people are moved or motivated and persuaded by, cartoon characters. That's why there's all this clip art. They can't be persuaded by anything logical. It always has to be hidden in some joke or some friendly little simplicity. Everything has to be reduced to baby talk, for it to be a conceptual idea. I mean, here's a cupcake with a birthday candle on it. How does that represent efficiency? A sheep holding a pitcher. How could these things be possibly connected to the word efficiency? Just silly mush. Anyway, so yes, the subject of society and ethics those are two good subjects, but they don't belong in this order of mush. All right, then he says the politics of morality. So why are we even playing with the word morality again? It's too dogmatic a term, like there's some sort of God that hands down this idea of what is moral and what is immoral, when logically we can know that this is a philosophical debate that's active and real right now. There's this definition of the truth, regarding the nature of value and what really has value. Do your ambitions have value, or does your welfare have value? Is it more valuable to make you comfortable, or is it more valuable that, because you want your son to be a great doctor, that he becomes a great doctor, or something like that? I mean, your personal ambition measured against, these much bigger ideas of true accomplishment. And so, I would argue that the thing we should understand philosophically about morality is that we're talking about a value equation, and the discussion is what has value. Does the feeling of the pig in the farm concentration camp have value? Is the pain of the, you know, the wretched refuse being exploited by the zillionaires have value? Does the welfare of the worker have value? I mean, all this stuff is the real point, the real issue. And, I mean, you either understand that value is really just in the context it's essentially created when you create something that can feel. You've essentially created value, because now it's important that it doesn't feel bad. And that's just a fact. And everything else you place value on, whether it's a nuclear power plant or, a nice car or any of these things, those things only have value because people derive comfort or pleasure from them, or safety, or efficiency, or function, better function. They improve function. And function is always tied to creating greater comfort and good. If you're more productive at work, it's likely you're providing a better, product for the consumer. All of this kind of stuff. I mean, that's the way we would like it to be anyway. We would like our productivity to be used by more than just the obscene rich to get obscenely richer. Comforting the rich is, not, in my opinion, a very efficient way to exercise your productivity. But that's the only choice we've been given in this bad society, this unethical society, that gives the unearned every privilege and considers the worthy, treats them unfairly, simply. All right, so the politics of morality. So again, more mush. I mean, it's always going to be a politics in the sense of that just means another word for arguments. The arguments about what is really important, what does have value. Is it the welfare of things that feel, or is something else have value? And I think the only rational argument that can be made, and there can't be any rational counter-argument, is the only thing that has value is the welfare of feeling things. Now it's just a trade-off. Some people think certain feeling things are more deserving than other feeling things. And their definition of deserving means, in many cases, they fell out of the right vagina. All right. Progressive liberty. Now, isn't that a pile of mush? So this idea that you can have, that progress comes with, there's lots of people who, they talk about this resource economy stuff, back to that zeitgeist nonsense. And they think that people are going to be, they'll maximize their productivity entirely voluntarily. And they really can't do it that way. Even if they're really good people, they just aren't going to be able to do it voluntarily. Because they're always, unless there's a little bit of a confinement, there has to be some spikes that point in the right direction. There has to be a little bit of whip, and you just can't do it any other way, because there's no practical way to make this idea of you achieve your perfect comfort and you also happen to be extremely productive. Those two things won't go together. Somebody has to do the shitty jobs. Somebody has to put in the extra hours. Someone has to sacrifice, give their last measure of devotion, to use Lincoln's war words. And there's no other way to, you can't make it, you can't just spread it all evenly, the burdens. And clearly, as individuals, we're just too selfish. So we do need to be nagged or forced into maximizing our productivity. So if you try to think of having some commune or something, you have to have a commune that has some sort of honor rules or some sort of punishment, some sort of guilt mechanism, some kind of powerful mechanisms that will, in fact, force people to do more than they want to do. Because you're not going to want to do hard work. You're not going to want to damage yourself physically. You're not going to want to do all the things that productivity often has to be made out of. Progress just doesn't happen for free. It does require us to be sort of whipped in the direction of it. You're going to get there a lot slower if you don't have some mechanism that forces us to march a little faster. So, and clearly the future needs you to get, especially now, there needs to be a big fix. And that means lots of labor, lots of sacrifice to even get us back to a point where we haven't catastrophically damaged the future. I mean, there's $40 trillion worth of debt that somebody has to clean up, or it's on the future. And you don't clean up that big a mess without feeling the pain. All right. Anyway, the liberation of progress. So it's progressive liberty and then the liberation of progress. Get just silly wordplay. I mean, just what could that kind of mush possibly mean? The liberation of progress. Clearly, progress isn't the problem. We have made huge bounds in progress over the last 100 years. The problem is that the way we got there was through exploitation. So we don't need to liberate progress. We need to make it more efficient, and we need to spread the value of the progress more evenly, and we need to invest in progress that has more to do with a fairer distribution of what would be considered something worthy of investing in. As it is now, everybody's obliged to invest in child production. We have to finance it, the expense of it, the health care of it, the education of it, the social liabilities all over the place. Everything has to be made child safe. Huge liabilities. So we've invested a huge amount of our social infrastructure in facilitating people having children. And why should every human be obliged to think that's a productive pursuit or a useful thing to be doing? And now that balance is swung, they're importing people, that are child producers to fill the gap and re-alter the balance so that we've finally gotten to the point where half the people in civilized countries don't have children. And so they might even be able to start exercising a few rights and saying it's not right that you tax me out of my house to pay for other people's children. If they want to have a dog or a cat, I shouldn't be taxed out of my house. Why should I be taxed out of my house for them to have kids? And that's essentially what does happen. I mean, 80% of property taxes is in some way or another related to financing children, people having kids. It's only a tiny part of local government that has anything to do with everybody's interest. It really just has to do with the majority who have kids, and they want to force everybody else to pay for them. So that's part of this equity. Now, he thinks it's progress if everybody's forced to finance other people's lifestyle decisions. He thinks that's progress, that we're all obligated to fix everybody else's problems and clean up everybody else's messes. And I would say that first, you give people a chance to do that themselves. And that's what we should be emphasizing. But we shouldn't be just putting up the safety net and saying, go ahead and use it. No, it should be there for the right purpose, which is accidents. It shouldn't be there for willful acts of let's exploit your generosity. Let's exploit the fact that I can hold a kid up and say, give me money or I'll drop the kid. That's essentially what the system has become. And that's bullshit. But these people who call themselves progressives don't want to fix any of those problems. They don't want the poor people to take responsibility for their lives and the fact that they haven't done what's necessary. They haven't been efficient and productive enough to earn the right to play God. They haven't demonstrated that they have enough control of their own lives to be able to control somebody else's creation. Those kind of messages have to be sent, and these progressives aren't going to send them. So they become toxic to the problem. They're just as bad as the enemy. I mean, if you have soldiers on your own side who are shooting in the wrong direction, they're just as bad as the guys on the other side of the line. So they are your enemy. And it's a real problem in our politics because it's that toxic now. It seems quite intractable, the voids that are being created, the distance in terms of understanding and ethics. So again, I've talked before about the fact that I'd like to create some kind of fairness first party to compete with these notions where, yes, all the value goes to the workers first if possible. Consumers and workers are the only two important elements in our economy. We don't need owners. And that, there has to be responsibility for liberties. If you want extra liberties, you have to prove there's some realistic hope that your liberty won't turn into somebody else's liability. I think we should have social insurance for things like you end up living to be 100 years old and you only saved money for 20 years of retirement, so you don't have enough money. I think that's understandable, and you have a provision for that. But like I said, these aren't accidents. We're not catching accidents in the safety net. We're catching people who are willfully and deliberately reckless. They're getting drunk and walking the tightrope and falling in the net and laughing. Ha 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 ha. That's just bullshit. Substantial bullshit. So, our obligation to each other as citizens, our obligation to be as efficient as we can be, and to be as mindful of each other's, of impositions on each other, and, squandering and wasting, especially for, those minority of us, maybe it might be a majority now, who are limited and dysfunctional and in some way marginalized, disabled, compromised. There's nothing wrong with being mindful of the fact that you don't have a right to millions of dollars in health care and all this stuff when you're not making any contribution and you're just taking out of a system and you never put anything into a system. There's got to be some kind of humility when you're in that position, and there just seems to be an awful lot of arrogance by people who think, you see it in all these conservatives. Again, Tom Brokaw, now another woman molester, wrote this stupid book, The Greatest Generation. And it did a really great job at fighting wars, but it did a really shitty job of building a civilization. Because clearly they've dumped all the burdens on the future. They haven't done anything to clean anything up or fix anything. They've just exploited the fuck out of everything. They've created a real mess. Because they think everything it's going to work out just fine if we turn everything into some capitalist for-profit enterprise. And you're just throwing away efficiency with that kind of nonsensical notion. It's not the road to efficiency, it's the road to inefficiency. It's a bunch of wasted death and bankruptcies and wasted infrastructure, sitting there trying to figure out who's best. It's just like evolution. Evolution kills most of the things it creates very quickly. So it harms and tortures and destroys. 99 times more things than it rises to some wonderful plateau of perfection. Um, and so it's a terrible model for getting to the top. You don't get there by piling up bodies and climbing up the dead bodies, and that's essentially what capitalism does. Tons of waste to have your efficiency, and then the byproduct of your having a winner is that your winner just turns into a dictator and exploits the fuck out of you until you create some other gladiators who are willing to go tear it down. You know, to try to fight with it and lose most of the time. It's just plain stupid. Horribly inefficient. So anyway, all these images, just again, nothing, just absolutely an important word like efficiency, and there's just nothing here that looks anything like efficiency. You know, just no real good metaphors for the concept. I mean, a McDonald's hamburger, yeah, an apple on a table, a silhouette of boob girl. Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. So, just garbage. So then I tried productivity, and it wasn't any better. Yeah, and it should be, because it's like the most important word there is we're a functioning machine, just like a car engine or any other thing that functions. We function. And the two things we're playing for are our own satisfaction and comfort, how strong and powerful we are, and how good we feel, and maybe how long we live. A lot of people think that's really important. And so we're playing for something personal, and clearly we're affecting something that's personal to everybody else in the sense that it's going to affect feeling things. So there's the feeling thing that you are, and your comfort's important, and you know it, because it's happening to you, and it's quite obvious. If you have a tiny bit of IQ, just a tiny bit of IQ, you can figure out that other people's comfort is just as important as your comfort. You're not doing a special kind of consciousness. You're not a specially important consciousness. You're just one of billions of consciousnesses, and that, the idea is that broken leg is broken leg is broken leg is broken leg, and this idea that, well, if it happens to me, it's a real thing, if it happens to them, it's not real, would be idiotic. So it's a logically obvious circumstance you're in. So you're having two effects. You're having an effect on one tiny brain, one brain, and you're having an effect on 7 billion brains. So there's these two worlds you're interacting with. And the obvious point I would make is that you should be able to see with a little bit of perspective that if you harm 100 external brains to satisfy your one little brain, that's inefficient, that's stupid, that's unproductive, that's destructive. You've cost more than you're worth. The value of your comfort can't possibly weigh more. Scale. See, no scale here, right? Should be a scale, should be like the first image, right? No evidence that you have satisfied your obligation to at least be neutral. And you should, if you have even a little tiny bit more IQ, be able to figure out that you really need to maximize your function while you're here. That's the only use your intelligence really has, is to increase your function and decrease your friction, your lack of function, the costs of your functionality. So consume as little gas as possible, value from the world, and produce as much work, value to the world, including yourself, as you can. So, and I think we can do that while still maintaining some kind of, still taking the subjective heroin of treating ourselves a lot better than we treat the rest of the world. I mean, to be satisfactorily productive doesn't mean you have to completely sacrifice yourself on your own comfort. It just means that if you you know, gain your satisfaction with some degree of efficiency, you can be very productive in the world, and still um, get through your life in a comfortable enough manner without you don't have to compromise too much of yourself to be minimally or satisfactorily at least productive. At least give more than you took. So I've used the condo example before, like a timeshare, where many people own a building and they all share it, in the sense they all are entitled to 2 weeks. Clearly, you can understand that the only way the thing has value is everybody who's using it has to take care of it. They can't leave it in worse condition for the next guy, because if they think they can do it, then you do it and everybody does it, and then the condo doesn't have any value. And so you've all lost not only your money, but your use of something that was of value to you. It made your life better. And that's the minimum. The minimum is you don't dirty the place worse than it was. You always leave it better than you got it, a little bit better. And I'd say we can leave things a lot better. We don't have to leave them just a little better. We can add value each time we go there for 2 weeks. We could spend 2 days of those 2 weeks doing improvements. And if everybody had that attitude, we'd have a very grand civilization. But people don't think they're obligated to give 2 minutes to their civilization a year, let alone 2 days out of every 2 weeks, or 1 day a week, or even 5 hours a week, or even 2 hours a week. And that's a huge flaw in our social memes, is that no one has that conversation about how we're rottenly selfish, and we obviously are not civilized, because none of us believe in civilization anymore. People have lost capacity to understand that if we want one, we have to make one, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to do the little bit of work it takes to make one and maintain one. They just want to do what's in it for them, and figure out what's in it for them, and what's in it for me, what's in it for me. And it's toxic. And especially now, it's sort of a difficult time, just because in some sense, to invest in our civilization is to invest in people like Donald Trump or something, to invest in a bunch of racists, or to invest in a bunch of deluded tree huggers who think you can import 10 million ignorant poor people with wacky fanatic religious ideas, and your civilization will be fine. So you have these people on these bizarre extremes, and so how can you invest in your civilization when most of your civilization is the Nazis? It is something completely stupid. So our ability to contribute is, even if people, the biggest problem was people didn't save our civilization when they could have saved it. They didn't realize they had an obligation. They just all turned into government conspiracy theorists. And government's always bad, government can't do anything, blah, 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 when clearly it could. You just have to fix it so it will. It won't in the current condition. It won't if you allow government unions to define their own rule book. That's not going to work. So, there should have been rational constraints put on how inefficient government employees can be, and how corrupt the infrastructure of government can be, how much graft and theft the people organizing and controlling the system can involve themselves with. And sure, clearly, since the 50s, we've been told about the military-industrial complex. We've been told about how capitalist money works its way into government and just corrupts its purpose. And we end up with huge inefficiencies, created by stuff that cannot possibly work. It can only possibly fail. So, more fundamentally useless images here for the word productivity. Nothing that really gets to the idea of making more than you consume. producing more than you consume, producing more than you consume. I mean, no real, and that's really what the word should, that's the image that should be in your head, is a car that's just spilling oil and spilling gasoline, that's wasting all over the place. The gas just leaks out of the tank and the oil leaks out of the crankcase, and it just, for every mile it goes, it wastes, $100 worth of fuel. It spills on the road. And that's what we've accepted as a world we have to function in. Somehow we have to be part of this horrible gear work with all this clanging and all this friction, and all the gears don't fit and nothing's efficient, and somehow we have to engineer ourselves into that as a personally satisfied human, and also in some way where we have some hope that if our gear turns right, it'll start making some other gears turn right, and that we can actually fix something. But like I said, it's, couldn't be a worse time for that message, just because there's no viable choice. The liberals have gotten insane in terms of their silly expectations. You just spend the money, spend money, spend money, and that fixes problems somehow. You don't oblige people to be more reasonable or more productive or more thoughtful about their waste. You just build more nets and build more bullshit to let them bounce on, to trampoline on. That's not going to solve the world's problems. You can't keep saying poor people are great, because they're not. They're a huge liability. They keep creating crisis. They live in circumstances they shouldn't live in. They get blown away. Their houses get blown away in a hurricane. They create this huge need to be, taken care of, and they have kids they can't afford. I mean, it's a horrible liability, and they got to quit saying poor people are great. Poor people are great. No, poor people would be fine if they didn't sit there and think they have a right to make more poor people. I mean, it's just silly to say I have a right to create more liability, and you have to build more nets for the liability I'm going to create. So this is the word waste, and they just turned it into, it's all garbage dumps. And a lot of garbage is waste. I mean, I don't know what percentage, but clearly a lot of garbage is garbage. So this waste pile isn't really all waste. It's a lot of it's actual garbage. It's poo. I mean, it's stuff you're just no point trying to reuse, because it'll cost you more money to try to remanufacture it than it's worth. And so you find an appropriate place to, you fill the earth with it and let it decompose over a few hundred years. And so even our way of managing waste has improved over time, so some of this stuff isn't nearly as inefficient as it used to be. But again, these aren't really appropriate icons for the concept of waste. I mean, waste is the stupidly reckless things. The waste is the unmaintained tires on a semi truck. Waste is taking those radioactive barrels and thinking you can throw them in the ocean and they won't rust and leak. Because that's just going to create more long-term pain for short-term gain. But there's probably lots of better metaphors for solar panels on roofs would be a really good metaphor for waste, because you're taking a valuable resource, and it's just like painting black paint on diamonds, and just leaving a little tiny bit of the diamond. So the diamond looks like a tenth of a carat diamond when it could look like a full carat diamond, and it only looks that way because you've thrown it away. You painted it black. And putting solar panels on roofs is just throwing away the efficiency of the technology. It's just it's such a silly utilization. So it's like making a soda can that has holes in the side. So after you drink the first 2 ounces, the rest of it all spills out the holes. They actually make jars that way now. I don't know whether you've noticed it, but they pretend like they've made them easy to grip. But what they've done is made them impossible to get the food out of the jar, right? Because it has so many convolutions in it that you lose 10% of the food because you can't get it out of the jar. And they're just doing this because they can get away with it. You know, this waste. There's just pointless waste. So you have to buy more product. So you think you're getting 16 ounces, but you're only getting 14 usable ounces. That's just throwing away food. It's just destroying. It's burning money. Burning money is a bad example because burning money actually makes everybody richer. So it's never a good example. Money doesn't have any value. It just represents value. So when you burn money, you make the stuff that exists in the world more valuable. Um, but yeah, it's just all this. There's no examples of waste in any other sense of this trivial waste when we have such substantial waste in terms of the amount of money that many of our systems consume. The cost overruns, the promise that it's going to cost this much and it costs 10 times as much, and it'll never produce anything. It'll never produce anything in terms of a value that'll be anywhere near the amount of money you wasted on it, much like our Middle Eastern wars. We would have gotten so much more value if we would have just given $2 trillion to poor Arabs. If we would have taken CIA agents and just had them distribute over 10 years $2 trillion to the poorest Arabs in the Middle East and say that, please recognize that, the theory of evolution is a pretty good thing, and that civilization requires people to learn how to live with each other, and you can't be fanatically believing in dogma. We can't kill each other over our 3 little pigs story versus the 3 bears story. We got to get out of this fable psychology, blah, blah, blah. And just make sure they knew, USA, that, here, we're saying we want you to be civilized. We want to have a civilization on the world here. We don't want to have a war with you. We don't want to have to hate you. We don't want you to hate us. We got to find a way to live together. Here's some money. Please think about it. That would have been so much more productive than shooting people and blowing up infrastructure and then sending in our capitalists to rebuild it at a preposterously high price. A huge amount of money just pissed away. A huge amount of human labor wasted for nothing, just to create hate and resentment, to create orphans that will come back and kill you. It's just so fucking stupid. But again, this just nothing here getting to the fact that there's waste in so much of what we have created as systems, and that they're not what they should be in 2018. They're not as reliable and as mechanically fluid, and lots of gears not meshing, lots of friction, lots of dysfunction, and sometimes very tiny actual accomplishment, for huge expenditures, very little real world improvement in the condition of conscious organisms. Again, you could even talk about that in terms of the food industry. They've used technology not to not to make the process of farming more humane, but just to make it more efficient again for the exploitness, the consumer. So just a total disregard of the value being wasted, the harm being wasted to create hot dogs. It's disgusting. To create food that people shouldn't even be eating, totally inefficient food that breaks your gears, your personal gears. Just such a waste. So anyway, I guess that's preachy enough. I'll see. I have some notes, so maybe I'll just go over them quickly. I've argued before that I don't know, there has to be some forum for arguments where people have to argue to the death. They really have to get to the base ethical truth questions and identify each other as glib and nihilist cunts versus rational, um, humble, you know, people who recognize they're not the center of the universe, you know. But it's all, you know, I think most of these arguments are beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just, it can't be doubted by a reasonable person that these efficiencies are there to be grabbed, and we're squandering it because people have just idiotic notions of that somehow you can't do it efficiently, that it can't be done that way, when of course it can be. But they can't let go of their notion that it has to be done through their, Google has to give it to us. If Google doesn't make it, it's not worth making. That kind of insane psychological barrier. Anyway, so yes, we have all done Earth. I mean, just kind of an important beginning. You know, we acquired reflexes. Our brain is just reflexes. So it gets into the function argument about, you know, we don't have a free will. We have an informed brain. And even though the word will is just another spiritual word, it should just throw it out. The word only exists because we're using it to describe a certain kind of event that takes place where we logically recognize it's more efficient if I do this instead of that. And we're calling that willing. And it's really not willing. It's just the difference between something, recognizing when something's wrong and not recognizing. Either both decisions will happen, and we don't want to take credit for the ones that are stupid, so we say we didn't will that. But the ones that were correct, we say, oh yeah, we overpowered our desire to drink and drive, and we used our willpower to say that would be really dumb, don't do it. When clearly that's not what happened. It's just that your brain, through a couple of images, like you in jail, you being fingerprinted, you looking into a car with a bunch of dead kids in it, and you said, I don't want to do that. You know. So you had enough of a thought process that stopped you, and you had that enough because somebody said it a few times, you saw a few commercials or something else, and it just rang a little bit too true, and because it rang a little too true, your brain threw it up at you at the right time and gave you the courage to say no to being an asshole. Anyway, sensation is a value experience. You know, it's just such an obvious statement. Sensation is a value experience. You just can't, I mean, you know, to have a sensation is to create value. I mean, it's automatically built into the sensation. The sensation can't be interpreted as anything else but a value statement, a value creation. It's the bing, value exists as soon as the sensation takes place. All right. Something has to affect the welfare of a feeling thing to be made value relevant. So it's all value, all statements about anything else's value. The value of this bottle cap just comes down to it saves people aggravation or sickness or some way harm. That's why it exists. The bottle cap exists because it reduced harm. And that's the only reason why it's valuable, is because it reduced harm. So everything's tied to reducing harm in sentient beings. Mostly humans, unfortunately, but for some of us, we do things to reduce harm in all things capable of being harmed. Alright, feelings define goodness and badness. Feelings defined desirability. Well, those are just kind of obvious. Attraction, repulsion. So these are just functions of the brain. So it just converts the statement of the feeling into a behavioral pattern, a tradition, a habit. So you become essentially addicted to these notions of it works. And most people are saying it works for me, and that's as far as it goes. And then the people who have a social conscious recognize it works in the bigger context, which means I'm more functional, which works for me personally. So they gain a little bit of self-gratification, self-respect, pride, by recognizing their own productive contribution. Intelligence is seeing pattern consistency and pattern inconsistencies, flaws. So that's all we really are doing with our intelligence, is attempting to see things that work and things that don't work. You know, see that there's a consistency with the rational expectation. You build it, and then you see if it goes down the track and works properly. You know, test it, and there has to be a consistency between the function and your model of how it should function. But yeah, that's, fundamentally we're just looking for patterns that don't match. Patterns that match, patterns that don't match. And once you have an idea that there's this pattern called efficient, then you'll compare things to the efficiency pattern and find them flawed if they don't measure up, if they have gasoline leaking out of the tank. The waste of suffering is bad, absolutely. It's just a fact. That's right, an unrefutable fact. People who don't really know other people are real. Yeah, well, that's just for the puro wackies who waste time with idiotic concepts of solipsism, as if they think the universe has been created for their entertainment, and that there are no other vulnerable, value-creating consciousnesses in the balance of the game. That the other players' broken legs are just as real as your broken leg. Some people don't think that, because they think the whole universe is created to entertain them. And that is insanely stupid. I mean, again, you only need about 15 IQ points to figure out how that can't be right. Alright, so that's enough, I think. So, link to the Coughlin channel. And otherwise, I'll, fiddle with this subject some more. In terms of this value subject, this is everything. There's no way of getting around. It's, squandering the welfare of feeling things is just, by recklessness and self-interest. And there can't be anything worse than waste. And everything our civilization is doing is just full of it. And it doesn't have to be that way. So, till the next time, such, so forth and whatnot. Just tired of it. Just tired of people, tired of it all.